So I'm going to jump into the story. I'm going to be in 1 Kings 19, verses 1 to 15. So if you've got Bibles, head there, or the words will come up on the screen behind me. Now, Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. All at once, an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he travelled for 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into the cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountain apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." The Lord said to him, "Go back the way you came and go to the desert of Damascus. When you go there, anoint Hazael king over Aram." So, Elijah is fresh from this massive spiritual victory over the prophets of the false god Baal. Fire falls from heaven, false prophets beaten, and God's power shown for all to see. If this was me, I'd be on the mountaintop and absolutely buzzing with excitement. But one threat from Jezebel, and it's all too much for Elijah. We see at the start of the story in verse 3 that Elijah becomes fearful and runs. He loses sight of God and forgets what he has witnessed. He breaks down, he runs away, he hides and asks for death. He is well and truly in the valley. There's no judgment here. I think this is a pretty valid feeling. Some of the most powerful people in the land have said they want to kill him. But we see, as we progress through the story, that God will bring comfort to Elijah. It reminds us that God meets us in the valley, not with anger or judgment, but with kindness and gentleness. It reminds us that no one, even people with the spiritual strength and faith of Elijah, are immune to exhaustion or feeling overwhelmed. It's a reminder that even when we experience those mountaintop moments, like Elijah did, that a crash and swift descent into the valley can be just around the corner. It reminded me of the story of Jonny Wilkinson, one of the most successful kickers in rugby history. Now, this is coming off the back of, I'm an England fan, and after the back of last night's game, which I'm sure some of you saw, but at 18 years old, Jonny Wilkinson became England rugby team's youngest cap for 71 years. He was an incredibly successful kicker, and he regularly changed the outcome of games. And the biggest of moments, a World Cup final against Australia in 2003, is the final seconds of extra time. The score is 17-17. The ball pops up from the ruck into Johnny's hands. He kicks and he scores a drop goal. Yes, Chris. Yeah. Still feel that pride. Yes, so England win the final. And Wilkinson instantly becomes the most famous rugby player on earth. Boyhood dream achieved. And yet, he says, by that point, I ticked off every goal I'd set myself. That final was my Hollywood ending. I walked into the sunset after that game. The credits came up, and the next morning I woke up, and I could not have felt more empty. In the aftermath of that World Cup win, Wilkinson found himself in a dark place. Despite achieving what most athletes could only dream of, he struggled with the expectations placed on him. That perfect hero image weighed heavily on his mental health. He felt trapped by the pressure to always be his best, leaving him disconnected from his true self. Now, Wilkinson turned to isolation and self-doubt, pushing away the very support that could have helped him cope. He experienced what so many people have when they achieve that goal that they have been chasing with a laser focus, that it just doesn't fulfill us. So this morning I've got 3 points I want to expand on. Point number 1, bad stuff happens. If we look at verses 1 to 4, we see that valleys are real. Elijah has not been weak. He hasn't rebelled. He hasn't lacked in faith. In fact, he's just witnessed one of the greatest displays of God's power in Scripture. You could almost imagine him walking off into the sunset and the credits rolling after Mount Carmel. Instead, we see a broken, exhausted, and frightened man running for his life. He says, "I've had enough, Lord. Take my life." Now, this isn't just a throwaway prayer. This is the same man who saw fire fall from heaven when he prayed. And for him to ask for death shows just how deep the valley he is in really is. And how many of us have felt something similar? Maybe not the exact words, but the weight of it. I can't keep going. Sometimes the valley comes after the mountaintop, after breakthrough, after the busy season, when the storm has passed and the adrenaline fades, the reality settles in and exhaustion hits. But notice how God doesn't shame Elijah for being here. God doesn't rebuke him for feeling overwhelmed. Elijah is honest, and God allows for that honesty. The valley is not proof that God has abandoned us. It's part of being human. So point number 2, God cares for us kindly and deeply. In verses 5 to 8, we see the heart of God the Father caring deeply for Elijah. God doesn't correct Elijah. He doesn't say, pull yourself together, try harder, push through. Instead, an angel comes, touches Elijah, tells him to sleep, gives him some food. And not just any food, it's fresh bread, cooked over hot coals. Imagine it, you're burnt out, you're exhausted, and you wake up and there's an angel baking you some fresh bread. Got the smell of the wood smoke, the crackle of the fire, the taste of hot, fresh bread. Sounds great. Maybe missing a couple of sausages or a burger. But I know that that's exactly what I would want. I can see Al nodding along. Barbecue, yeah. I know that in that moment, that's what I would want. And Elijah has another nap, has some more food, and then he's ready to get back on his feet. The angel says to Elijah in verse 7, "The journey is too much for you." There is recognition of Elijah's capacity and that rest is needed in order to go further. You can't keep going on empty. If you try and run a car with no fuel, it just won't move. We are the same, but we don't always want to recognize that. And before there's any discussion of spiritual direction or what the next action is, God addresses the exhaustion and how overwhelmed Elijah is feeling. He deals with Elijah's humanity, his limits and his needs. Our humanity and our limits and our needs are God-given. And if God doesn't ignore them, neither should we. God understands that we struggle to trust when we're tired, that hunger makes us lose our perspective. We all know what being hungry feels like, right? And there's that great source of wisdom, Snickers, who are right. You aren't you when you're hungry. Exhaustion and hunger will alter how we view the world around us. So point number 3. God is not a taskmaster. He is gentle and reassuring. At the end of verse 9, God asks Elijah a question. What are you doing here, Elijah? This isn't an accusation. He doesn't say, why are you feeling like this? Or what have you been doing? Instead, it's an invitation. God invites Elijah to explore the reason why he is in the valley. He wants to hear from Elijah about what he is feeling and what state Elijah finds himself in. And Elijah tells God of his anguish. In the Message translation of verse 10, it says, I've been working my heart out for the God of angel armies. The people of Israel have abandoned your covenant, destroyed the places of worship, and murdered your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me. This is really raw stuff. And Elijah lays it all out for God to hear. He has given his everything to God, to spread God's truth and to get the people of Israel to turn back to God. Have you ever had a moment where you felt like you've been slogging away, just pushing forwards, and got to the end, and you feel like everyone and everything is still against you? Maybe you're feeling that right now in an area of your life. It's after Elijah has been brutally honest with God that the big demonstrative stuff happens. Wind, earthquake, fire, and God's in none of them. He had been earlier, in the earlier story of Mount Carmel, God was in that fire. When Elijah needed that power, God was there. But now, God shows up in the gentle whisper. He doesn't show himself in that same powerful way. And God doesn't berate Elijah for being in the valley. Instead, he comes in a gentle whisper. God doesn't always shout at us when we are low to get our attention. I know from my own experiences of the valley that God is more often in the gentle, whispering, kindly way to get my attention. When my kids are having a meltdown, if I try and meet them at the same level, screaming and yelling and throwing things, I don't get through. It's at the moment when I come to their eye level, put a hand on their shoulder and tell them that it's all okay, that we can start to work out what's needed. But this is also why God comes in that gentle moment. The earthquake, wind and fire must have been terrifying to Elijah, who is in that heightened, anxious state. Instead, God reassures him with quietness, stillness and gentleness. When Elijah shares his fears and frustrations, he is not rebuked or told off. He is reassured. He is told that he is not alone and that he is not yet finished and that there is a future for him. God gives him purpose. So for those of you who like to make notes, you'll be pleased to hear that I've made 3 points, and then for nice symmetry, I've got 3 actions, which I thought was nice and simple. So action number 1, spend time in community. Elijah thought that he was alone. We see that he leaves. He runs far away in fear for his life. Goes from Jezreel to Beersheba, which is about 100 miles. That's probably about a week's journey, maybe a little bit less. And when he's there, he leaves his servant in the city and goes another day further out into the wilderness. Elijah is far from his community. He may have felt like he needed time and space to process his thoughts, get his head in order. And that's a valid thing to do, but it can only do so much. But here we see that Elijah isn't isolating himself from God. He is retreating to be with God. Even when he just repeats the same thing or says that he wants to die, he is saying those things to God. Isolation deepens our despair. Like we saw in the Johnny Wilkinson story, isolating himself made things worse. But here, we see Elijah retreating from others to go and be alone with God. He spends time in conversation, engaging with God. We see later in the story that Elijah goes and finds Elisha to be that community and support in his ministry. Possibly, don't know this for sure, but he recognizes that what he has done before, being a solo prophet, hasn't worked out, and that he needs someone to support him in his ministry. Now, before I came to faith, I was fully reliant on myself in tough times. I was taught from a young age that my stuff was mine alone, and that I couldn't take up space and emotional bandwidth of others with what I was feeling or going through. And this led to some dark places. It also led to me being quite emotionally stunted and never journeying out of valley places, but instead just setting up camp and living there. Just this week, I had a work meeting go really poorly, which I didn't expect. And I did what I used to do. I shut down. I told Em, my lovely wife, that I'd had a bad day and I didn't want to talk about it. And she was great, as she always is. She asked me and pushed me to talk, which is what I've asked her to do. But I kept saying I didn't want to talk about it. It was only later in the evening when I was prepping this talk that I clocked what I was doing, and I was isolating myself from community. See, community brings perspective. People who know us and care for us are able to ask questions that help us recognize that we are in the valley. We see God asking Elijah, "What are you doing here?" And this is what community does for us. Maybe you feel alone in the valley right now. Maybe you feel surrounded by others who are in the valley. Maybe you're on a mountaintop, or you're somewhere in between all of them. Wherever you find yourself, we would love to find a place for you in this church where you feel like you can have community and support around you. When I first started coming to this church, I was amazed by how people would ask me how I was, and not just in a polite surface level way, but they'd follow up with real care. For me, becoming involved in this community meant joining a small group and later a team. And this gave me an opportunity to get to know and be better known by those here. For you, it might look different. There's different ways to be in community. Join a small group, join a prayer meeting, go to the gym, ask someone for coffee. Whatever community looks like for you, make use of that. The valley is a lonely and isolating place, and we're not made for isolation. Reach out to the people you care about. If you don't have anyone, then come and talk to one of us here, and we'd love to support you with this. Action number 2, rest. In verse 5, we see God command Elijah to rest by sleeping, eating, and drinking. And then in verse 6, he wakes up and finds more food and water waiting for him. He eats and he lays down again. God commanded Elijah to rest, and not just to sleep, but to eat and drink. He is commanded to care for his body so that he is ready to go again. When we're in the valley, it's easy to think that we just need to go back up the slope to the mountaintop. But if it was that easy, we would all just do it. In verse 7, we see an angel come and explicitly say to Elijah that the journey is too much for him. Long journeys can be tough, and life can be tough. We need to be rested and ready to go. Rest is not laziness, it's obedience. God built you with rest and Sabbath in mind. In my day job, I'm a mental health social worker, and I work in the community with people with complex and enduring mental illness. And the 2 questions I'm always asking people is, how's your sleep and how's your diet? Because we know that without those things being in balance, people's mental health will spiral. They won't have the energy to walk out of the valley. They won't have the capacity to see that they're in the valley and that they need help. And that's true for every single one of us. So action number 3, last action. Stay engaged with God. Don't just numb yourself. Elijah didn't stay sitting under that tree forever. He kept talking to God, even when he was just repeating the same words over and over. He wasn't afraid to be messy and vulnerable with God. He knew that God already knew he was in the valley, When you're in the valley, the temptation can be to ignore it, distract, or numb yourself. This could be with the latest binge watch, social media, shopping, pornography, alcohol, anything which gives you a quick dopamine hit. But it wears off, and you quickly realize that you are still in the valley, and you need another dopamine hit. Take the example that Elijah shows us. Wrestle with what you're experiencing. Ask God those hard questions. He isn't afraid of them. In the New Testament, we see Thomas doing this when he was doubting the story that his friends have told him of Jesus' resurrection. But he stays engaged. And I'm sure in that time he would have been discussing with the other disciples and praying about what they had told him and his doubts. And we see that a week passes, Jesus comes, and those doubts are answered. God takes those questions on board. Being engaged with God while we're in the valley can be really tough. And I know from my own life, when I've been in the valley, that I didn't want to engage with God, that I just wanted him to fly me out and put me back on the mountaintop. But even in those valley seasons, God is at work. There are seasons when prayer feels powerful. Look at the story before this of Elijah on Mount Carmel. And there are other seasons where we feel like our prayers are never heard. As I come into finish, I just want to recognize how hard this is. A Christian writer called John of the Cross describes seasons like this as the dark night of the soul. Personally, I've been in that space before for long periods, and it was really tough. When I first came to faith, I experienced the mountaintop of the excitement of knowing Jesus, having my life have purpose and value, and of feeling valued and loved and seen for the first time. But in time, that mountaintop faded, and I descended into the valley, and I was there for a long time, probably about a year, maybe a bit more, and I just didn't feel God. He felt distant. I was working through and processing, having my whole life turned upside down. From a man who was living for himself, without any purpose or any meaning, to an adopted son of the King of Kings. And I would spend long periods of time praying, reading my Bible, chatting to wise people, and listening out for God. I was doing all the right stuff, but I was still in the valley. I can look back now and see the fingerprints of God on that time. But during it, it was really, really rubbish. But the dark night or the valley is not the absence of God, but rather the quiet work of God. C.S. Lewis wrote this after losing his wife. Where is God? Go to him when you are desperate, and what do you find? A door slammed in your face. Now, this is a writing of a man who is clearly in the valley, but he didn't stop praying and wrestling with God and writing honestly. And he later reflected that grief had reshaped and not destroyed his faith. Now, Elijah kept communicating with God, even when he repeated himself. When he was discouraged or exhausted, he kept going because he knew that God was listening. He refused to numb himself or to run away from God, even when he fled everything else. Maybe when we're in the valley, faith looks like staying engaged. Not loud declarations and spiritual highs. Faith is not feeling the presence of God. It is staying turned towards him, even when that feeling fades. Faith in the valley doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it simply looks like staying. Staying in community, staying in prayer, staying engaged. So the same gentle God of this story is the same God who sees you. He knows your limits. He is not finished with you. Even if all you hear right now is a whisper, he is still speaking.